Merry Meet Little Woman Appreciators. Today's comment shoutout goes to Stop It Lol, who says the following. I just can't stop thinking about how Jo March would be a raging feminist in these days. Just imagine her speaking out about women's rights on social media and protesting on the streets. How she would go out of her ways to break the patriarchy because it's just bullshit. She would also take her husband with her. Don't tell me she wouldn't, because she would. And Fritz would just stand there looking at her in awe, because she is such a strong woman and he is so happy that he found her. She'd write fantasy books that portray the different types of feminism, using novels to explain everything, because everything is more fun when you use your imagination. What makes Little Woman interesting is that Jo doesn't start out as a feminist. To be honest, I don't think any one of us start out as a feminist. She's actually quite a misogynistic character for most part of the book series, and when she becomes more influenced by her sisters and Friedrich, she becomes more feminist. When Jo is with Laurie, they both treat women like objects, but when Jo is with Fritz, she begins to treat other women a lot better because he does. And same happens with Laurie when he is with Amy. I always enjoy our discussions with Emily. This time we'll be talking about the portrayal of female characters in the media. This is Small Umbrella in the Rain, Little Woman podcast, Jo March, the portrayal of strong but very lonely female characters in the media.
To you about this right before I talked a few days ago or like last week when you remember when I said it doesn't really make sense how Greta Gerwig has divided up the two timelines into a very happy and perfect timeline and then this really grim and like more like moody timeline. I was thinking about it and I was like, before I messaged you about it, I was like, this makes no sense, because what was so rosy about the Civil War, about living in the middle of the Civil War when their dad is away? He could die in action, and also they were poor, and the whole reason that Marmee was angry all the time, why she's angry every day of her life, is because she's watching her kids live in poverty. It's not great, and they have to save on things, and they have to make personal sacrifices. If things were so perfect, then that dichotomy does not make sense. And it also takes away, of course, from the very optimistic American message of the story, which is that, you take away lessons that you learned in childhood, and then you apply them to adulthood to make your circumstances better. Like adulthood is not, it's not supposed to be sadder than in childhood. The two stages of life, they are connected. And so people in my video were explaining to me, you see, the color grading is to highlight how one timeline is supposed to be darker than the other, and one's more optimistic and great. And I'm like, that makes it worse for me, because that goes against all the messages that I've got out of the book.
One of my friends said that Jo is made to be a martyr in Greta Gerwig's film. That double timeline really shows that she's this romanticized person in these childhood images, and then this martyr in this gritty, terrible adulthood images. I felt that they killed Beth just so Jo would become a writer. That's not why Beth exists. That really bothered me. All that stuff, being this very childish, immature person when she's interacting with Friedrich, that goes against the novel as well. And then that part of her almost accepting Laurie's proposal, what was that about? So it's, none of that really resonates with the novel. If you look at childhood with roasting classes, especially in this case, we lose all the context that there is.
Yeah, and basically talks a bit about how, the Civil War is almost pretty much erased in the 2019 film. And I think they try and bring it in maybe a couple times, like in scenes with Marmee, like when she's like kind of volunteering. And but apart from that, like it feels very much absent, because the 1994 and even like the 2017, we were still grounded in that reality. In fact, 2017 I think emphasizes the Civil War the most.
Yeah, it does.
Out of all of these, out of all of the adaptations, because remember they added in the part with John going off the war.
Yeah.
You know, we have more of their father's perspective, was a really interesting angle. I thought it was really great. That's what grounds the whole story in reality. That's the thing, because she was saying that life is hard, but you make the best out of it, no matter what stage of life you're at. I almost feel like Greta Gerwig, she looked at that first part of Little Women, so the Little Women, and was like, oh, this is so great. But then in the second part of this novel, Jo went off and got married, and and my favorite couple didn't become a thing. So I don't like it. I think it's just a statement of how her personal preference of the two books. Of the two parts. I don't know. Frankly, it's just not an honest interpretation. You're just being very biased towards one part of the story versus another.
Alcott Scooter, Emmeline Birch, she did some criticism on this. She said that if you change the narrative of Little Woman, so basically when the story of Little Woman is being changed, then you are just starting to spread false information about the Alcotts. If you change the narration of Little Woman, then you change the narration, what people think about the Alcotts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Louisa, she was a nurse in Civil War. She knew what the war was like.
As well. And I don't see her as... But then I guess people don't like it when she kind of settles down to marry someone. But I'm kind of like, well, no one forced her to become, feminine again. I don't think she even puts that aside. I think she just is just like, well... I'm ready to be an adult, be a productive adult, take care of my family. Yeah, I think she's comfortable with that.
Yeah. And I think Jo's 28 when she gets married.
Yeah.
She's super old in the 19th century context when most girls married when they were 17. But I think it's not about rejecting marriage at all. When Louisa was alive, most marriages, they weren't, love marriages. And she saw lots of very unhappy marriages around her because, they were not based on love. They were based on money and comfortable lives. Louisa wanted to promote that idea that you should marry for love if you are going to marry someone. The Marchesters, father and the mother March, they say to Meg, you should be 21 when you get married or older.
Yeah.
Nowadays, if you are 21 and you get married, people are like, that's way too young age to get married. Louisa is promoting the idea that a love-based marriage.
I think she's pro marriage between two fully formed adults.
Yeah, exactly.
That's how I interpret her take on things. Because I don't think we have many very young marriages in the novel. Because I know for Meg, Marmee and their father, they actively make her delay the marriage. They like John, but they actively make them wait, which is the thing. But also they want John to be in a stable living first, which is totally legitimate. Jo is in her late 20s. I think Amy is she's got to be in her early mid 20s when she marries Laurie, and I think she. Very pro find yourself in the which I think is not even something that we see a lot in young adult novels even these days.
Yeah, very true.
Because a lot of young adult novels is just oh, we're 17, we're going to be together forever, and whereas Little Women, it's just no, you need to wait, hold up. You're not a fully formed person yet. And this is how you know that she was a more mature woman when she was writing. And I appreciate it because I think that sort of holding off and being maybe I'm not a fully formed person yet. I think that's a totally valid thing that we need more in fiction.
I think this is part of the first conversation that we had. There's this narrative that Louisa wasn't interested in love or marriage, but then you can read her diary. There was this man who she had crushes on.
Yeah.
And even considered marriage. It is a weird narrative.
Yeah, no, I think people were very resistant to this in the comments on my video because they were no, she admired them. She just admired these men, as artists. But
no.
I'm
no.
No, I think it was more than that.
There was a lot more than that.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure. A lot of people, I I don't know. They're so like attached to this one narrative about her that I feel like they're a little bit blinded. If you went into the research without your own sort of preconceptions, then you would see this, which is baffling to me. How people think that Greta Gerwig did her research so much, like going into making the film, because I'm like all the things she's saying, all the things she did in the film. This doesn't indicate that she knew about the writer, that she even wanted to acknowledge that. She had her own narrative that she went in, and then she picked the bits that just in what she was saying, like the whole, Louisa didn't want Joe to get married, but then she wrote in a love interest just to, please her publisher, which, doesn't track when you consider that Louisa wrote, 2 sequels around his marriage.
Daniel Sheely, he made the research on the letters that Louisa wrote with her publisher, came to the conclusion that, all the marriages were Louisa's idea. But it's so funny because I was doing the research on these stories that Louisa had been reading, the love story between Joe and Frederick, and then Amy and Laurie. You can trace them back to the stories that Louisa was reading as a teenager. And some of them also to the relationships that she had with these men who she had crushes on. Or maybe it was something deeper. Kind of missed the whole story if you don't pay attention to that. I was speaking with a friend of mine who's a big Amy fan, and they've been doing this research on May Alcott and then Louisa's relationship with her, May. And then Julian Hawthorne, who was, their neighbor, he had a crush on May. And also he was very artistically inclined, and he didn't want to go to college. And then May Alcott, she was sort of scolding him about that. And I was wondering, okay, Louisa might have got some of her inspiration from there. If you just say that only tomboys are feminist, that's only going to harm the feminist movement.
The political landscape now, I don't know if you observe this in a lot of fiction now. I think I talk about it a bit in my video. A lot of media now shows these people who need to be single in order to be strong. Star Wars Rise of Skywalker came out the same year as the new Little Women. For me, the main character who's a female, she ends up alone. She's this glorious, powerful person, and she's alone. Lots of people sound very depressing because I'm this person who craves family, like Joe, by the way, who's so lonely, really ends up alone. And I think the fact that Joe, in this adaptation, goes through a very similar process. I mean, she ends up with her book, her glory, and then she ends up alone. And that's how she remains strong and independent, which I think also is very harmful to feminism as well, when you show a few modes of being strong, being a strong, independent female. And especially in the particular context of that story, I think it's actually quite harmful as well, because you're saying, only Joe got to be accomplished, and the only way she was able to be accomplished was by not being with anybody, not marrying anyone, which is not true to life.
We discussed how Emerson was a positive influence on Louisa with her writing. So basically, if Jo doesn't have Freddie contributing to her character arc, she would have remained in this state of writing these novels that she called trash.
Yeah.
So she would not have grown as a writer, and she would not have become this billionaire who, people were chasing crickets in her backyard. If you erase Fleetwood's character, Jo doesn't get her character arc at all. She doesn't get her family, she doesn't get to start a school, and she doesn't become a writer.
Yeah, definitely. I think, especially in Gerwig, I think she also takes away some of the influence, the mutual influence of even Laurie and Amy's relationship, because I don't think she shows why this relationship works, or justifies why that relationship works. But by erasing Friedrich, and you also erase the nature of Laurie and Amy's relationship, the foundation of that relationship, you don't acknowledge how relationships are actually quite influential in your life. You are just showing that, you really shouldn't need anyone. When in fact, sometimes your partner is the person who really influences your work, really helps you to be the best person that you can be. That is very much missing from the adaptation, and I think is a very important theme of Little Women, is having someone who helps you be productive.
Yeah, very true. And I read this bit horror quote from Louisa from the time when she was in her 50s and she was really struggling with her illness. And she wrote, she's envious to her sisters when she sees their marital happiness. So it's a bit sad how, people just, ignore these kind of things. But I think a lot of people don't really like to believe that Louisa could have actually felt loneliness, because she's kind of become this imaginary character for some people. One of the things that Jo does in the book, and then something that also affected to Louisa's life, was that she did not want that people saw her vulnerable, which is a very masculine trait, if you think about it.